Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitinwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
My guest is Gil Griffith. He is the founder and CEO, is that right? Do I have your titles right?
Yes.
He's the founder and CEO of Waves Distribution. You got a pretty colorful history. I don't want to go through, when I was a small child or anything like that, but obviously you started as a musician, right?
When I was young, I used to play drums, and I had a double bass blue plexiglass Ludwig clear kit from the 70s.
Were you a metal dude?
No, actually, I was into Neil Young and Yes, and a lot of basically, I wouldn't call it hard rock back then. It was just rock.
With a double kick, huh?
Well, because it was impressive, and I liked Led Zeppelin. I liked that was as metal as we got, that and Sabbath. Mm-hmm. But the problem is between the cymbals and the bass-mounted toms, the girls couldn't see me behind the kit.
Oh.
And like a lot of musicians, I became a musician because I wanted to meet the girls. There was a band in my middle school that was looking for a guitar player, and I couldn't play guitar. I tried. I could get maybe an E7 chord, but I couldn't get my fingers on 6 strings to do what needed to be done. And I'm like, I really want to get in this band. And my teacher said, bass only has 4 strings and they're far apart. I go, oh, okay. So I took up bass, and my cousin, who's 6 years older than me, he was a bass player. He loaned me his Hofner Beetle bass, which was great because I could rehearse without an amp, Mm-hmm. And he taught me a few songs to get in the band. And then I started working at Ramada Inn at the weekends, cleaning toilets to save up for my own bass. And I bought a 73 P bass, which I still have. And being a bass player, I was very fond of, in those days, Felix Pappalardi from Mountain was one
Absolutely.
of my heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Chris Squire from Yes. So I had a Sun 2000S. So I had a double 15 with the Sun Coliseum, and it sounded amazing. And time went on, and the band we played around Jersey, and it never really took off. So I had to get a real job. And I was working in a restaurant, waiting tables, and this flamboyant guy comes in from Texas. The restaurant I worked at was called Texas, and he says, "I'm from Texas, and if this isn't real Texas food, I'm not paying the bill." And he smiled at me. I go, "Well, sir, it's Jersey-style Texas food, but I'm sure you'll like it." And while I'm waiting on him, he's very funny, and he's making me laugh, and so I'm making him laugh. And I said to him, "What do you do for a living?" He says, "I work for a company you never heard of. They make bass and guitar amplifiers and PA systems." I go, "I'm a bass player." "Who?" He goes, "Sun." I said, "Sun, I have a Coliseum. It's the only bass amp that makes my P bass sound like a Rickenbacker, so I can play Chris Squire." And I started telling him how wonderful Sun is. Well, I didn't know that this was 1982. In 1982, Sun was...
Oh, they were finished.
They were finished.
Yeah.
And Marshall and Peavey and Mesa Boogie were the brands. So unbeknownst to me, he was in town looking for a rep, and all the reps he'd interviewed knew that Sun was in trouble, and they're like, "What's in it for me?" kind of thing. I had no idea, and he saw that enthusiasm, and he said, "Are you making $85,000 a year here?" And "No." He said, "You want to get $85,000 a year, you call me." Gene Fresco, National Sales Manager, Sun Musical Equipment Company.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, okay. So I call my fiance. We were going to get married later in that year. "You're not going to believe this. I just waited on a guy. He's the sales manager for Sun. He offered me a job, $85,000 a year." She goes, "What?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Is he gay? Was he hitting on you?" I go, No. His wife was with him. It's legit." She goes, "Something's not right." So there was no internet then.
Right.
I went out to a local music store, got a Sun catalog, learned what I could about the line. He calls me up. He says, "Meet me at this music store in Connecticut 3 weeks from now." I meet him there. I walk in. He introduces me as the new Sun rep. We hadn't even talked about it. So I flubbed my way through it. The old, if you fake it till you make it thing.
Right.
We go out to lunch. I go, "Gene, you ambushed me. What's that?" He goes, "There's something about you and your enthusiasm for this brand. I'm going to make you my Frankenstein. You're going to become the greatest Sun rep that ever lived."
Wow. Okay.
And he trained me. He was a legend. He had originally, before Sun, worked for Ampeg. He launched the SVT.
Yes, I've heard his name.
Oh, he's brilliant. And back then, the SVT was 2 cabinets, it weighed a ton.
Right.
And it was expensive. It was like $1,800, in the 70s dollars.
In $70, yeah.
So we learned a lot, and I, not knowing any better, went out with enthusiasm and sold so much sun, I quadrupled this business in a year and a half. And I had fun doing it. I had 8 states from Jersey to Maine, loved it. And then my then wife and I were trying to have a baby. It wasn't working out. Got tested, waiting for results. I get a phone call Thanksgiving. Son got bought by Fender. You're out of a job in 30 days. So sign up all the dealers you can, write all the business you can, we'll pay you. I go, it's Thanksgiving, 30 days is Christmas. Yeah, sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So I call my wife and I tell her. And she goes, great, and it probably worked this month. I'm probably pregnant. And she was, and that's our daughter, Laura. So a good thing came out of a bad situation. But I had to go get a new job. And I went and looked at Radio Shack to manage a store. I went to Maxell Tape in Fair Lawn, New Jersey to see if I could go work for there because I used their tape all the time and really believed in it. I've never sold anything I didn't personally believe in. So my mother-in-law says, you should go see a sales consulting firm, a recruiting firm. And I go, all right. So I put on a suit and I go to sales consultants in New Jersey, and they look at my resume and they go, we just had a job at this company. You would have been perfect for them. But they hired a guy from Sony, just left Sony. So we'll keep your resume handy and we'll call you. Okay. A week later, he calls me back and says, remember that guy I told you took that job at that company that you'd be perfect for? He didn't work out. I go, what's the company? They said, Eventide. Eventide. So again, no internet. This was late 85.
So was this pre-harmonizer?
Oh, yeah. Well,
okay.
I mean, they had the H910 had been out since, Eventide was founded in 1971.
Right. So I don't remember the timeline.
Yeah, there was the baby harmonizer, there was the H910, the H949, and by the time I got there, the H969. So I go for a bunch of interviews, and they liked me, and they hired me, and I started in January of '86, and it changed my life. Now, my dad was a travel agent, and he believes that clothes make the man, so he's very proud of his son. He takes me out to a tailor, and I get all these beautiful suits and shoes and ties to match. And I mean, he buys me a bunch of suits, and I'm all set for this new job. I'm the sales manager for Eventide. And I get there, and I had read a book about dressing for success, and it said you should emulate your boss. Well, I didn't know Richard Factor, the president of Eventide.
I know Richard.
And I get there, and what does
wasn't in a
Richard
suit.
wear? He wears jeans and T-shirts. And he would wear T-shirts with Led Zeppelin tour stuff on them. And his employees would be like, oh man, did you get that at Hot Topic? He goes, no, I was at the show, the garden. So I bought all those suits for nothing because that job didn't require it. But what happened?
Well, and in fact, it's actually almost an anathema. You don't really necessarily want to show up to a lot of these clients in a suit.
I didn't know.
Yeah,
and my dad's heart was in the right place.
Yeah.
I still have some of the suits. In any event, what happened then was I got involved with the company on a very intense level, and I got to meet all the engineers, and they were brilliant. And a lot of them were new. He just hired them. And what Richard had done wisely was he hired kids right out of college, young men right out of school, knowing that they would work hard and have to make a name for themselves in addition to being on the payroll. The older school engineers that had designed the previous line of products were engineers first and musicians not at all usually. And their products were very engineering centric. What he hired this time were musicians.
Right.
Ken Bogdanowitz, who now owns Sound Toys, Bob Belcher, who works with Ken, and Dave Durr, who now owns Empirical Labs.
Yes.
So they were all passionately working on this new product, a 2-channel harmonizer. That would be the next generation of harmonizers. And they put their hearts and soul into it because it was their first job. I think he was counting on that, but he didn't realize how good they'd be at it. Bob Belcher, for example, he designed the motherboard and the operating system. So he had 2 full-time jobs simultaneously. They put a comfy chair in his office, and he slept at the building and went home on weekends to shower, basically. Brilliant guy. And so he was working really hard. Ken was working on the software algorithms that would become the pitch shifters and the reverbs. Dave Durr was working on the I.O. And what I did for the first time in the company's history was I went out and talked to the artists. I was working with Steve Vai. I knew him from the old days. And I spoke to a bunch of front of house engineers and people like Steve Vai and said, what would you like to see in a new, if you had a blank slate, what would you want to see? And they gave me some wonderful feedback. And I went to Eventide and said, let's utilize this. And they said, well, what are we going to pay them? I go, oh, we just give them a free unit. Well, if we give them away to them, who are we going to sell them to? I go, trust me. So with Steve Vai, he came up with the idea. What he wanted was to be able to set an interval based on the key he was playing in and have the harmonizer track him, say thirds and fifths, to do triads.
Right.
And I explained that to Ken Bogdanovich, and Ken said, you know, I've been thinking about that. It's called diatonic pitch shifting. And I backburnered it, but yeah, we can do that. They put together diatonic pitch shifting. We sent it out to Steve. He spent a weekend woodshedding with the harmonizer and got a DAT tape, which I still have, of just him and the harmonizer, 3 solid days. He said, I love it. One more thing. Can you let me write my own scales? I don't want to use the standard scales. I go back to Ken. Ken said, yeah, mixed Lydian Phrygian. Sure, I can do that. So we put in the custom scales. It's a few days before the AES. We're going to announce it in 1987. Very exciting. And I go to get the prototype and get, start to play with it. And the keypad was like a calculator. It was 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. I go, no, hold on. It's got to be like a payphone.
Right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah.
And they're like, well, we're engineers. I go, trust me. So they had to reprogram it the last minute. That keypad put the reverb in the H3000 at the level of the AMX, AMS RMX16, because that had a keypad, and that was $4,800. Here was a harmonizer with reverb for $2,300, but it gave the perception. Okay, so we launch it at the AES. It's a massive success. We're all stoked. We're starting to count our money, and that weekend, that Friday, the stock market crashed. 500 points, I think.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I remember Joe Shapiro saying, in a recession, cash is king, and no one's going to want to spend $2,300 on a signal processor. Well, anyway, that didn't end the world, and we started shipping that March of the following year, and the product became the most successful pitch shifter in the history of the company. Ken, Dave, Bob, and I were very proud of what we did. We're still proud. We're still friends. We still see each other at trade shows. In fact, this AES coming up, we're going to be across from Sound Toys and probably have some kind of reunion there. But the important thing was, for the first time, we had musicians who were also engineers, and we had customers that we trusted sharing with us what they wanted, and it was very customer-centric.
And that was the bridge right there. A lot of times that a lot of companies didn't have prior to those days, was this understanding between the engineers and the actual musicians.
I think that was a turning point for the brand. And what we then did was made a broadcast model that had some features for radio stations, because Eventide was known for their 7-second delay for broadcast live talk shows. And we did a different front panel with different color buttons for that model. And then, speaking with Bob Clearmountain, he wanted to be able to control the pitch shifter assigned to a fader on his SSL, where the center position would be, say, 0 pitch shift, and he could program 18 or 20 cents sharp or flat, and then as he moved the fader, he could automate the pitch shifting for mixdown. So we talked to him, and we made a model for professional recording called the SE, the Studio Edition, with Bob's help, and that had a different color front panel and different knobs again. But inside it was the same hardware. We just changed the EEPROMs and the software, repurposed it. So we ended up doing that several times, and we came out with the Steve Vai model, which was blue, the H3000S. We had a model for dynamic processing when Ken Bogdanovich made some dynamic algorithms. We had the DFX, which was for dynamic effects. We had several versions of that, and Joe Shapiro said, man, nobody can beat a dead horse like Gil Griffith. I repackaged that thing.
A backhanded compliment.
But we made 7 versions over 10 years, but it was extremely successful and still very desirable today. I found one at Retro Gear here in East Nashville that he took in on trade, and I said, oh, I'd love to buy that. It was the model with the sampler board in. How much? He said, $4,500. I go, they were $3,500 new. And they're hard to get
Now it's
repaired.
vintage.
Yeah, but they became vintage even though they're digital.
Yeah.
And you can't. They're still very desirable. So
There's plenty of vintage digital. I mean,
I know it's just weird to say vintage and digital.
I know.
But and the price now of Fairchild is just through this, obscenely expensive. And
Yes.
I don't think Eventide will ever get to that point. But the thing is, I'm extremely proud of all the work we all did to make that product. And when that product was in its heyday, Dave Durr had a home studio in his apartment in Garfield, New Jersey. And at night, he would record bands. He had a 16-track MCI 2-inch and a Ramza console. And he reconfigured the three-bedroom apartment. He put the drum room in the second bedroom. He put the equipment rack in his bedroom closet. And it was awesome. And I would record bands on the side. I used to manage bands on the side. And working with Dave was a trip. He was so fun. And he's a great musician. People don't know this about Dave, but he's a brilliant guitar player and a phenomenal pianist. And a great songwriter and arranger. So what he would do for the studio people was, if the song needed a little help, he'd go, what if we move the bridge? What if we change the chorus? And he would just give some advice that would make the song just pop, And people loved working with it. And that 16-track MCI had this punchy low-end bottom end. It was amazing. But people wanted 24 tracks, so he went and bought a Otari MX-80, I think, and went up to 24 track. The Ramza was already configured for it, but the bottom end fell out. The drums and the bass, it just didn't sound right.
Yeah.
And he realized that the problem was the track head width on a 24 track is narrower, and when you hit the tape, it doesn't saturate the same as 16 tracks. So he designed a circuit that would put that in. It's second order harmonic distortion, he figured. He designs this circuit, and he breadboards it. He puts on little metal standoffs, and he's, playing around with the thing and getting the sounds he wants. Then he realizes, I could probably add some compression to this distortion. And while I'm at it, I can't afford a 670, so I'll rent one and see if I can emulate it. So he starts emulating the 1176, the Fairchild 670, LA2A, and starts creating all these different sounds similar to those products. And then he needs a knob that he can see across the room, that he can set and reset. And he spends 6 months looking at knobs, and he comes up with this knob that we all know now. And he mounts that on the pots. And again, it's still breadboarded. It still has these little standoffs on it. And his clients are coming in, and he's using it. And every time he goes from bypass to line in, and that punch comes back, they're like, whoa, what's that? He says, well, it's compression with distortion.
Just a little something I whipped up earlier.
Yeah, a distorting compressor. It's a distressor. I don't know. And they go, can you make me one? Now, here's where necessity becomes the mother of invention, right? So he's like, well, I guess. So he goes and makes a formal circuit board design. He gets some metalwork from Mid-Atlantic Products down the street, and he builds a few units in boxes. And he puts 4 of them in the studio, and he sells a handful.
And he's still working at Eventide.
And he's still working at Eventide. And the studio got really popular. Eventide got really busy, and he had a girlfriend, and he tried to have a life, and he realized something had to give, and the first thing that gave was the girlfriend.
Oh.
And then
I thought you were going to say Eventide.
Then he left Eventide to focus on the studio and this product. And he came to me, this was December of 95. I left Eventide a few weeks earlier myself, and he said, listen, I built a few of these. Why don't you take one to Clear Mountain and take one to Steve I when you go to NAMM next month? I would love it if you could help me sell 100 or 2 of these. It'd be great. He also sent one to Fletcher at the time from Mercenary Audio.
Sure.
And Fletcher didn't call him back right away, and Dave was upset that Fletcher didn't like it, so he called him up and said, Fletcher, I sent you a distressor 2 weeks ago. Did you fire it up? Yes. You don't like it? Fletcher goes, like it. I freaking love it. In fact, I love it so much, it makes me happy when I use it. I'm elated by it, and there's your model number. Yep, true story. So I take the unit to Clear Mountain, I take it to Steve I. It's 96. They play with it for a while. They give me some feedback. And that was, 28 years and 38,000 distressors ago.
Yeah, it's done kind of well.
Barry Rudolph and George from Mix Magazine,
George
Peterson gave it their first reviews. And being in Mix gave it some credibility, and it just hit a tipping point and took off. And I remember when we had sold 10,000 H3000s, 15,000 total, I think. And we got to 5,000 distressors, and Dave's like, "Do you think we'll hit 10,000?" I go, "Slow down." We hit 10,000. He goes, "You think we'll hit 15?" I go, "Well, that's what the Harmonizer did, and that was the most successful product." I don't know, dude. Slow your roll. We blew past 15, 20. I mean,
Oh, it's in every studio.
it became a staple. And again, very proud of the work Dave did. Incredible work. But it's the customers that gave him the feedback that brought that product to life, and the customers that bought it and used it and loved it. And I think one of the best compliments it got was that it's the Desert Island compressor. It's the Swiss Army knife of compressors.
Yep.
And we've done incredibly well with it. So that was, a way to get my company off the ground, Wave Distribution. And I had also made some computers for DAWs at the time. It was Lexicon Studio with Cubase. Remember that?
Not only do I remember it, I was one of the beta testers.
Oh, there
for
you
it.
go.
Back when Steinberg was coming up with Cubase VST,
Oh, yeah.
my studio in Germany, in Hamburg, was one of the beta test sites. I wrote the first pre-review of the Lexicon Studio for Nick Batsdorf from Recording Magazine.
Sure. Wow.
This would have been like 97, 98, something like that. Somewhere around there.
Wow. I built a company called Wave Digital Systems to build DAWs specifically for recording. And my idea was to pre-configure everything, sign the end user license agreement, pre-install it all, so that you literally would buy a machine just based on Cubase or at that time Logic or Cakewalk. I would pre-install everything and I would ship it to you with the interface. You just plug everything in, and in 5 minutes you record it.
Yeah, and a lot of the people, if I remember that era correctly, a lot of the people you were working with didn't even know they were working, didn't even want to know they were working on a Windows machine.
It was Windows 3.11 at that time.
Yes.
And we had to do things like configure special swap files on the hard drive so that it would move things. Things that when Windows XP came out, Windows did automatically, but at the time, and we had nice margins back then. But then Dell came out with, an $800 computer with a free printer, and it just, DigiDesign worked with us on the PC Pro Tools, and we were the exclusive builder for them for the Windows Pro Tools. They were rack mount computers. So I did extremely well for a while, but then that whole industry took a major shift. The thing that impressed me was, I think about Michael Dell starting Dell in his dorm room. A lot of people don't know this, but Windows is a happy accident.
Yes.
Gary Kildall from Digital Research was the operating system king back in those days. And when IBM decided they wanted to do a personal computer, a PC, they had a meeting with Gary Kildall on a Friday. He was an avid pilot, by the way. And they went to meet with him, and his secretary said, "Oh, he went flying. It's a beautiful day." And they're like, "Isn't Bill Gates from Microsoft nearby?" And they went to see Bill, and Bill had just bought this program called QDOS, Quick and Dirty Operating System. Paul Allen was working on tweaking it and making it a Microsoft product. And IBM shows up and says, "Hey, we have a personal computer thing we're working on. We'd like to have an operating system. Do you have something?" He's like, "Paul, that's the QDOS coming along." I think he paid $32,000 for QDOS. And Paul's like, "Well, it needs a little work." And Bill says, "Sure, we have one of those."
Yeah. I can do that.
I can do that. So it was a happy accident, and it created an industry where a guy like me, who dropped out of college, who had no formal business training, could start a company using Intel components and Seagate hard drives and, SCSI from Adaptec and, and use other people's brands, DigiDesign, Pro Tools, Steinberg, Cubase, Cakewalk, Logic, and build a company and make millions of dollars worth of computers, employ a dozen people, and sell them. That was not possible before that.
Oh yeah.
It was our version of a gold rush. You know what I mean? Like, wow, how is that even possible? So it was very successful until it wasn't. And then the distressor took off, and I started focusing on other signal processors. People in the list, I'm doing a 40th anniversary thing for AES where I'm going through a timeline. You know, I launched Chandler Limited for Wade Goki. I launched Burl Audio with Rich Williams. I launched Dangerous Music with Bob Mueller. So I've launched a lot of brands and brought them to the tipping point. And then they, like a manager for a band, once they've gone platinum, they don't need you anymore.
That's what I've done with. That's what I've done with brand building too. I've got several companies that I help to build up, and then they get big
Brand
enough.
building's the word I like to use because I do so much more than distribute product. David Angris, who I think you know, is a good friend and it's one of the smartest people I know.
Yes, great guy.
And he shared a story with me that someone was telling him that with a distribution company, if you're not successful, if you don't do well, they take the line away from you. If you are really successful and do great things, they take the line away from you.
Right, because they bring it in-house. Same thing with PR and marketing. One of those curses of the job, you know?
Just because we make something look easy doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah, exactly.
We got good at it.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with distribution. And a lot of the brands have gone on to do great things. Dave Durr and Empirical Labs has been very loyal. We were friends at Eventide for 8 years before Empirical Labs, so we have a long connection there. And I currently work with Serpent Audio, which is based out of Pennsylvania, outside of Philly. Great line of products. Useful Arts Audio, Peter Swan out of originally Phoenix, now Durham, makes some brilliant mic pre's and DIs. And then I took on Kicktone, which makes a dual concentric driver turned into a microphone for Kicktone.
I've seen those, yeah.
It's brilliant. And we just got a lovely post from Sylvia Massey, who loves hers, and she's a microphone queen. You know. And then I took on a brilliant brand from a friend of mine, Dave Rosen, and his wife Kim. She's a mastering engineer from a company called Knack Mastering. He built her a product, basically a line amp, all tube. And it was pricey and hand-built. And I said, look, if you think it's good enough for your wife, you should probably go to market with it. He's like, really? I said, yeah, I think you have something there. So he created a company called Whitestone Audio. And he makes a product called the P331, and it's been very well received. We've sold it to a lot of mastering engineers, and now we're selling it to recording engineers. It was a little too subtle for some people, so he came out with a darker version that's a little more angry or a little more, has more attitude, and he calls it the EVL. It's the evil P331.
I see.
So, and that's got a black front panel. The original one has a white front panel. So we have two products, and he's working on some follow-up products. So we've been in several segments. We've been in MI with foot pedals and with lower-end products. We've been in Pro Audio, obviously, signal processing with the Distressor and the Serpent, and now we're going into the mastering side, the high-end. I'm also distributing the Strauss electroacoustic monitors from Switzerland for mastering. They're brilliant. So I have 6 brands, and we've done quite well. We have really good dealer network. I love the channel. I've been working with them since Sundays in '82. And we have built all this on relationships. Like you, the relationships turn into friendships and business opportunities. And it's nice to work with people that you can help grow their own business because you're friends and you like them and you want to see them succeed.
And you want to hang with them,
well,
even if you weren't doing business. That's the best part right there.
Being around studios and bringing the gear in, personally setting it up. With the H3000, I wrote a lot of presets, pitch and reverb, and did things, customized things for people who didn't want to learn about programming. One of the great things about that harmonizer was it had 4 main buttons and 3 small buttons. Then there was an expert menu. So if you wanted to go deep in and do things, you could.
Yes.
But the idea, and Dave Durr and Ken Bogdanovich were very insistent on this, was to keep it as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Yeah.
And the keypad made it easy to put the data in fast. That product succeeded because not only was it great internally and sounded amazing, but it was easy to use. And people could, if something's easy to use, you're going to use it. You remember the Infernal Machine from Publisan? That wasn't easy to use. He tended not to use it.
Same thing with the AMS.
That, I think, was critical. And Dave Durr brought that to the Distressor. And I've tried to impart that to the brands that I work with, that keep it simple and make it easy to use and make it sound great, and then try to keep the price right.
So one thing that strikes me here is that you fell into what you were doing without really even realizing what you were falling into.
Right.
But you fell into it pretty early. So
Yeah.
one of the things you did not necessarily suffer from was what I like to call the purity syndrome, which is I run into a lot of younger people who, this is my goal, I'm going to be a rock star or a producer or whatever, and working for a manufacturer, working on that side of things is somehow taking me away from my art, my artistry. And it doesn't seem like that ever really struck you.
I realized I was never going to become a famous bass player. I'm just not good enough. And I was in cover bands. I think I've written 3 songs in my whole life. I have produced records, and I don't have the patience for tracking. I hire engineers. I'm a good producer, and I have ADHD and I'm dyslexic, so mixing is not something I look forward to, so I hire mix engineers. And like everything else I've done in my life, there's things I'm good at, I do those things. The things I'm not good at, rather than try to get good at them, I just hire people that are good at them.
Yep.
And I do a lot of stuff at schools. I go talk to kids all the time about recording, about business. My daughter Kimberly's a teacher. She's invited me to her school in Queens, talk to her kids on career day. And here's the fire guy from the fire department. Here's the policeman. Here's her dad, the music guy. And so in talking to the kids, I tell them all the time, there's something you're innately good at that for someone else is difficult. Something that comes easy to you that for someone else is hard. That someone else will pay you for what you're good at.
Yes.
Find out what that is and just hone that and become even better at it, and people will pay you for it.
And take that a step further. There's a number of things that you're good at. So you're, like myself, you are very autodidactic, self-taught.
Okay. You could have just said self-taught.
Yeah, but I like using big words, because that shows that I'm self-taught. Well, I too am a college dropout. Right. And one of the things that I think I came to terms with over the years is the idea that because we're self-taught, a lot of times we're figuring stuff out in something of a vacuum.
Yes.
And therefore, you don't necessarily know if you're doing it right. Why did this come so easy to me? I must be doing something wrong. I must be missing something or faking something or whatever. And it's a variation of the imposter syndrome in a way, because you think, this can't be right. And I had this one incident that really nailed it for me. Several years ago, I was interviewing a guy who had done a whole bunch of PBS documentaries, National Geographic, stuff like that, where he'd go and interview people, just like I'm doing with you right now. And during the conversation, he started relating to me how he does his editing. And I had just completely figured all that stuff out on my own. Okay, maybe I just put it on the timeline here. I do this, that, whatever. And he starts explaining to me how he did it. And the first thing I'm thinking is, holy shit, I'm doing it right. Because a lot of times, and the same thing when you're working in the studio, when you're working with artists, there's a lot of things that you just kind of glean.
Trial and error.
Yeah. But it's interesting to think that when you're talking to young people, you say, there's a lot of stuff that you're good at. And if you slice it thinly enough and say, okay, I'm good at this, I'm good at this, I'm good at this.
Yeah, how to make a career out of that.
That's how you make a career out of it.
The other thing about being an entrepreneur, which they don't really teach in school much, unless you go to business school, is that there's 2 problems with being an entrepreneur. The hours suck and the boss is a jerk.
Yes.
Okay.
Slave drive.
But the nail biting, the sleepless nights when you have to make payroll or you have to pay for a trade show and the cash flow, you're waiting on receivables, and it's scary being an entrepreneur.
It is.
And I've had as many as 18 employees at one point in my career. I've had, $100,000 payrolls, and just when payroll comes due, you have to have the money. It's scary. And when you have trade shows and you're waiting on a product to be released and they don't hit the deadline, and you go to the show, you have this big booth space and there's nothing new. And this kind of stuff is scary, and they don't teach you in school how to deal with that fear.
Right.
For me, I don't want to say I fell into it, but I kind of fell into it. When I was a kid, I was very thin and gangly and tall early, and I was very shy. And I figured, I'm not going to play basketball. I wasn't athletic, so I'm not going to be a jock. I'm not smart enough to be with the brainiacs. And in the 70s, marijuana was $20 an ounce, and beer was, really cheap, and the drinking age was 18. So obviously getting into partying was easy, and then getting a car gave me some mobility. But I read a book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And then I read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And then I read one of Robert Schuller's books, and I just started using my personality, my new developed personality, and the fact that in school I became a class clown. To get popular, I would tell jokes because I couldn't play basketball, right? I wasn't the smart kid in the class, so I got to be funny. Mm-hmm. And when I met Gene Fresco and he was training me on the sun thing, he said, now listen, Gil, when you go to a buyer's office, you got to look around, and if you see a pennant from a sports team, or you see a football, from the Giants, you need to have some stats and know some players so you can converse with that person. And if he's a Giants fan, you're a Giants fan. If he's a Raiders fan, you're a Raiders fan. So you need to know. I go, I don't follow sports. He goes, can you tell a joke?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that I can do. So I literally built my sales rep position by being the jokester. Mm-hmm. And having appropriate jokes to tell at the right time. And something I learned, by the way, we all know how compression works in the audio business. And in video, I have a beautiful television I love to watch. When they stream stuff, they know, here's black. We have 1 pixel of black, and we have that times 1,016,000 blacks, I have the punchline. I fold the joke down, my brain compresses it. I won't think about it for years. And then you'll say something that has a piece of the punchline in it. That punchline will come back and uncompress the joke, and it's right there.
Yes.
It's amazing how the brain works.
Somebody did that to me recently. They said Niagara Falls to me. I thought of that old Three Stooges skit. Yeah. I don't know where the hell that came from,
I did stand up for a while. I enjoyed it. But the funny thing is, if you knew me as a kid when I was shy, you'd be like, where'd this guy come from? And it was dropping out of college. Obviously, I like to say Steve Jobs did it. Bill Gates did it. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm putting myself on that level, but it makes it easier to say I'm a dropout.
Richard Branson.
Yeah, Richard Branson. So I had to work this out for myself, and I just got really good at relationship building and finding people like Dave Durr that are engineering driven. Sales and marketing is not their thing. Distribution obviously isn't their thing. They're busy designing products and being geeky, on the audio side and saying, how can I make this sound better? How can I make this work better? So I said, well, let me do what I do to supplement what you do, because you don't do that. And I'm never going to design a compressor. That's not my wheelhouse. And you're not going to do sales and marketing and distribution. So I ended up basically having them outsource to me the things that they needed as a small business that they weren't ready to put their own employees on, their own staff on to do. And it's worked out really nice. And some of the brands, we told them in the beginning, look, you have a 5-year plan. If your 5-year plan is to become this size company, you won't need me anymore. By all means, go on and take it in-house. So if you know that up front, you have an agreement, it's a lot easier to deal with when the time comes. But I've been basically successful filling the holes that are in the business plan for someone else to allow them to build that brand and focus on what they're good at, making more products, and I focus on what I'm good at. It's been a career now spanning 40 years. I moved here last year to Nashville to be in the middle of the music scene. Like I said, you're here, Vance Powell's here, Jimmy Messina's here, Billy Sheen's here. all of these wonderful clients and friends are right around the corner, within 5, 10, 15 minutes away. Paul Wolf is here from Fix Audio. And I really enjoyed living here and being in the thick of it. I still have my offices in New Jersey. I go there once a month for a week, and work there with my staff and my management team. But thanks to Zoom, the pandemic taught us all that. If it weren't for broadband, by the way, none of this would have ever worked.
Yes.
But because of the pandemic and using Zoom and Microsoft Teams, we can do a lot of stuff remotely that we couldn't have done previously. So
We can also be based in multiple locations.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing the same thing now. I'm toying with having a base in LA and a base here for the same reasons.
well, it's nice too, is that we're in hotels. You can have a meeting in a hotel. You can be anywhere and set that up, and I love that. I've even had it where I'm on the way to the airport and I have a meeting. I'm in the car driving and I got the iPhone, with FaceTime on it, and so or in the plane waiting to take off. So that kind of thing has changed the world, and obviously San Francisco, LA, New York, having a hard time getting people to go back to the office. We didn't realize there's a whole infrastructure around office workers that is another economy, even down to people that shine shoes and people that own cafes and people, and so I look at that symbiotic relationship where one thing affects something else, and how can I figure out a way to be a positive force for someone who needs the things that I have, the Rolodex of dealers, the relationships with the artists and the dealer channel.
That's a great point.
And that's what I've been really focused on. And then meeting you, I've known you for years now.
It's a business of relationships, and that is one of the most important things I think that I've learned, is that it really, we're so interrelated in so many different ways. I said to somebody recently that I said, our Venn diagram looks like a sunflower, because you're really, so many other people who you run into for various reasons. And I think that in itself is probably one of the biggest secrets of entrepreneurship. If you've ever read, there's a great book by Seth Godin called Linchpin.
Yes, I love Seth. And the other one is Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V.
Yeah.
I don't have Dale Carnegie anymore. I don't, those guys are gone. Napoleon Hill, that's old school. So we have Seth, we have Malcolm Gladwell, we have
there's another great one.
Gary V. And
Daniel Pink.
Yes,
is another one.
So I've kept on top of all that stuff as my continuing education, if you will, because I'm 65 now. I'm not going to retire. I don't play golf yet. I don't fish. I don't know what I would do.
That's my problem. And I tried golf, but the ball's too small for the court. It just doesn't work for me, But I think retirement in and of itself just sounds to me like such an anathema, because I want to live my life the way I've been living it until I can't do it anymore. And if we're lucky, that's what we get to do.
Well, my hobby has always been music. And for a while I played it. For a while I produced it or managed bands. Now I've been collecting and listening and going to a lot of live shows. Everyone, the musicianship here, you cannot swing a dead cat in this town without hitting a great musician.
It's true.
Everyone is a great musician here. You go down Broadway, you hear live music coming out of every bar, and there's just brilliant musicians.
On multiple levels.
Yeah, multiple levels.
Floors, yes.
So I love going to see live music here, especially because the musicianship is so good. And I was never a big fan of bluegrass until my good friend Kuster McAllister from the Record Plant Remote, who started the Telluride Bluegrass Festival.
Was a great guy.
Yeah, he turned me on to it, starting with Alison Krauss, Emmylou Harris, and then he worked on Down from the Mountain, which is the band from the soundtrack from Oh Brother Where Art Thou.
Yep.
And Dan Tyminski was instrumental in that and wrote some of the songs, and he was the singing voice for George Clooney's character. So, Kuster brought me into a side of the business and a genre of music I never really appreciated, and now I love it. And so I've been upgrading to Atmos. I'm surrounding myself literally with surround sound because I've been 5'1" with my home theater for years, got into DVDA, got into SACD, love surround sound. Atmos adds a whole new dimension to it. And I've been a big defender of it and promoter of it, and a lot of people are still down on it, and I've spent more time arguing about Atmos. Well, what I found with Atmos is that if you go to legacy content and you don't have a lot of multi-track to work with, the Beatles Revolver is a good example because it's only two channels.
Yeah.
And the artist isn't involved in the process, and you're upmixing or you're rushing something because the label says we want this content. It can be bad.
That's problematic, yeah.
It can be weak.
Witness the Marvin Gaye remixes, yeah.
But if you have a producer engineer, you have the multi-track, and you have someone who understands that band, the record itself, and they do it properly and tastefully, your workflow has to change. You have to think about music differently with Atmos. But the ones that are well done, I think, are brilliant. There's a few of them that are stellar, but some of the new bands that are actually recording with Atmos in mind for the mix later.
With the intent.
That's the best stuff. Animals as Leaders.
I heard some
Ghost.
Imagine Dragons stuff.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I think like any technology, I grew up through the quad era, and I had a quad system, and it had a little joystick.
Yeah.
And it was gimmicky.
Yep.
Have I heard some gimmicky Atmos mixes? Absolutely. Have I heard some really brilliant Atmos mixes? Absolutely. Yes. I prefer the brilliant ones.
Well, and it's like anything else. You can overuse it, you can abuse it, or you can use it well.
I think when people are lazy and just do an upmix, or they use software to do it, and And the other thing is it does fold down to whatever you own. So if you have a nice set of headphones, it'll work in the headphones, especially the Apple Macs.
Yeah, the binaural stuff.
If you have a 5.1 system, it will take the height channels and the side channels and fold them into 5.1. If you have a 7.1 system, it'll take the height. So it'll do all the things it needs to do for you to enjoy it with whatever hardware you do have. Mm-hmm. We had a producer here who lives down the street, and he heard the new surround mix of Dark Side of the Moon. And he literally sat here, caved his head in, because he hadn't heard it since since he was in headphones as a kid. And the whole time he just sat there. When he was done, he's like, whew.
And I've heard some of those mixes, and what struck me about particularly Dark Side of the Moon is that when we heard it originally, it sounded so big and so dense. And the truth is, it's very sparse. There's not that much going on. I
think it comes down to the engineer. I would like to see the artists be more involved, and the labels really don't want to spend the money to do that.
Yeah.
And I think Brian Lucy from Magic Garden Mastering. He's trying to establish a layer for mastering Atmos, because the mix engineers are the ones who just hand in the final.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
And so
somebody should be doing that.
But the labels really don't want to spend the money.
Well, yeah.
So
they want to have AI do it,
I'm not down on AI. Of course, like anything else, it can be used for good. It can be used for
exactly. It's a tool.
But it's a great tool. But the point is that we use it, and then we take what it's given us and we finesse that.
It's like putting a new instrument into the hands of a musician versus a novice.
Yes, that's
the
true.
The more innate ability you have to already see through the process, the better use you're going to make. It's like the first time somebody gets their hands on a synthesizer. A true virtuoso is going to milk different things out of that technology than a neophyte.
I think a lot of the kids today, I hate to be hey, you kids, get off my porch, the old man, but everything's been done that we're celebrating. Zeppelin, Beatles, Sabbath, metal, hip-hop, rap. It's all been done, and everything now is evolved from that. But what the generation that we're now selling to, kids from 18 to 34, let's say, they've never had the experience where something didn't exist before that moment, and then you heard Boston for the first time.
Yes.
The Cars for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen very often now. What was the last time you heard something that was so new and different musically that you stopped what you were doing and waited for whoever to tell you what it was, you could go get it? I can't remember the last time that's happened.
Having been with a lot of students myself, I taught college for a while as well. One of the things that strikes me is that you have a generation now of people who have largely never had the experience of playing in a band. And never had that experience of the interplay between musicians. And I think that also influences the way they consume music, and the way they view music.
And the way, it used to drive me crazy when I had the first iPod, and I'd be in the car with the kids, and I have 3 daughters in the car, and they would play the first, 30 seconds of a song, maybe 45 seconds, and then skip track. What are you doing? I was just getting in that. Well, we're done with that one. I go, you were half a minute into it. The other thing, we'd be in the car, they'd be talking. I would turn the music off. They go, what are you doing? I said, well, we're talking. Well, you can't talk and listen to music. I go, when I'm listening to music, I'm listening. And one of my favorite stories, when I was a young man, I had a Plymouth Arrow. It was a Mitsubishi hatchback. Plymouth made a deal with Mitsubishi, and it was yellow and black. It was a Bumblebee.
Oh, God, I remember those.
And being a hatchback, it didn't have speakers in the back. So I bought little boxes that held 6x9 coaxial stereo speakers in them. And I hand wired them and put them in the back of the hatchback. I never soldered the leads onto the posts. And every once in a while, if I turned too hard, the left speaker would move and the wire would come out, you know. So I had a rule back then. I probably still have this rule. If the song "And You and I" by Yes comes on, and we're in a car, you all stop talking. For the next, 10 or 11 minutes, whatever long that song is, you just shut up because we're listening to every freaking note. It's my favorite Yes song. I love it. And my girlfriend at the time, who I later married, we were driving in my Plymouth Arrow, and we were talking, and then You and I came on the radio, and she dutifully stopped talking. And I was driving down Route 304 in New City, New York, and I banked into a turn, and the left speaker slid out and right in the middle of the song. So it was a 5. I downshifted, I pulled over. She goes, "What's the matter?" I said, "The left speaker cut out." She goes, "It did?" Ooh. That's when I realized we don't all hear things the same.
Yeah.
I said, "Honey, 50% of the sound just went away. What do you mean it did?" "Oh, I didn't notice." Yeah. So that taught me something too, that being a musician, yes, you know what you're listening for. Maybe you're more engaged in music than a non-musician, but also we all hear differently.
Yes.
And women typically hear better than men. They have different bone structure around their ears, and that's why I think we should have more female engineers in the business. But that was a revelation to me that, wait a minute, you didn't notice that? Mm-hmm. So I hear things, especially when I'm defending Atmos, that maybe some people don't hear. Or maybe some people are just so cynical, they don't want it to be cool. Stereo's good enough. Well, I think some of our favorite records from the 60s and 70s were done in a hurry. You got to remember the Beatles put out a few albums a year.
Yeah.
I mean, every few months, and they had a lot of songs on them. They were short songs, but they had, 11 or 12 songs on them.
But one of the big points there is that as they were working on stuff, they committed.
Yeah.
You committed to things because you only had a certain number of tracks to work with, and you can't go back in that sense.
I remember reading a story about, it was George Martin or one of the other engineers. John Lennon was complaining that there was too much treble on his guitar. It was too bright. And George said, when I bounce it down 4 times, it won't be.
It won't be, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm like, George was thinking ahead. Eddie Kramer said that those reverse solos that Jimi Hendrix was known for, when he actually tracked them, he knew how to phrase them forwards, knowing in his mind what it would sound like backwards. So he phrased it properly so it was musical. Who thinks like that? I can't.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Well, that's like guys like Prince or Todd Rundgren who could visualize the entire song in their head and lay it down track by track. That
Remarkable.
Kind of stuff is,
it
really
I have a huge respect for that. And
Absolutely.
It's rare. Things that resonate with some people don't resonate with me and vice versa. But that's why we have so many different genres of music. That's why there is so much music.
Yeah.
And now you can create your own, you record in your own bedroom. There's more music than there's ever been. There's more opportunities than there's ever been. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great time to be alive in the music business.
I think it is too. And well, now that's a nice segue into what I wanted to wrap with which was, you said you talked to a lot of kids.
Yeah.
You talked to a lot of younger students. We are now in a completely different era in terms of not only how we create music, how music is consumed, how music is taught.
Yeah.
You and I didn't have an opportunity to go to a recording school.
No. There was no Blackbird Academy or Full
Exactly.
Sail.
Exactly. So you now have a generation that's growing up with different opportunities, completely different landscape, and really a completely different paradigm in terms of what music represents now. Not to mention the whole technology is different. We create music differently now. We don't necessarily interact as bands.
No, and you can go to YouTube and learn things without even going to school.
Yes. So what advice would you give 15-year-old you coming up in this era?
Well, I'll tell a story about one of the kids at my daughter's school in Queens. When I do these kind of talks, 30, 40 kids typically, there's a Q&A section. And there's always 4, maybe 5 kids that care enough and they have a question. And in this school in Queens, there was a young African-American kid who was about 14, 15 years old. And afterwards he came up to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Griffith, I really like what you had to say about finding out what you're good at. And listen, I've written a song. Can you listen to it? If I send it to you, would you give me some feedback?" I'm like, "Sure, of course, be happy to." I give him my card, you know. I go home. Later on in the afternoon, I get an email, and it's from this kid. And he sends me the song, and it's got hip-hop backbeat, some drum machines, some keyboards, bass patterns, and then live guitar and a vocal. And it actually sounded really good, and the song was good, and his heart was in it, you know. So I wrote him back. I go, "This is really impressive. What did you record it with? Did you use Pro Tools? Did you use an M-Box? Or, you know, like," he goes, "Huh?" I go, "Well, what did you," he goes, I put my iPhone on, and I hit play on the, you know, the sequence stuff, and I played and I sang. Now, the old me would have been like, "Oh, no, you need to have an interface and a laptop." But it made me realize, you know, he had a song in his head, in his heart. He wanted to say something. He took the tool he's had since he was a kid, a phone, smartphone, and he recorded his creative property, that thing that came out of him.
Yep.
The tool was right there in front of him. He didn't have to go get. There's a story that U2 always has SM57s on the floor in the lounge at the studio, because when Larry's doing the drums, whatever, and Bono's there with Edge, they get amused. He just picks up a mic and Edge will play something, and that, you know, a song comes out of it. But that mic always has to be there. Prince used to rent studios everywhere he traveled. He'd have engineers on standby, and he wouldn't even go, because he knew if he was in Paris and something happened, he got amused, he wanted to be able to go to the studio in Paris and record something. So this is that equivalent of that, only it's in the kid's iPhone. So I would tell the 15-year-old me, don't worry about getting the right amp or the right guitar or the right distortion pedal. Just take what you have available. Take a cassette deck. We had cassette decks. Hit record and play something. Capture your idea, capture that creative spark, and then you can always embellish it later. And we have lots of stuff to embellish with, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
So the main thing is, when I got money to start my company, I had to go to banks, make pitches for getting investment capital. And they asked, "What's your growth projection?" I said, "Well, let's see. The birth rate is X, and everyone who's born with the ability to hear is going to grow up and decide they like music. Anybody that goes, 'Music, I hate music, I don't want to hear music.' No, everybody loves music. A percentage of those people will decide they want to write music, and a percentage of those people decide they want to record what they've written. So my growth curve is exponential based on the population growth. And I got $250,000 from Commerce Bank. That's still true to this day. You have music, you love it. You decide you want to play it for any reason, girls, or just because you want to play an instrument. And then you decide, hey, I like this, I want to record what I've played. And that's our current music business. Anyone can do it. Not everybody should. There's a lot of bad music out there, but the barrier to entry now is pretty much non-existent.
Yes.
And that wasn't the case when you and I were growing up. Recording studios cost, you know, $5,000 a day. It cost $1 million to build one, and then you had to staff it, and you know, that's all changed. I do love working in studios. What I like about studios is the happy accidents. That doesn't happen anymore.
And the camaraderie.
But like if you, speaking of Mountain earlier, The Who was recording Who's Next in Studio A, and Mountain was recording in Studio B. And literally on the way to the men's room, Leslie West and Pete Townsend bumped into one another. "Oh, you're here? Yeah, we're recording in B. Oh, we're in A. You want to come in and sit on," and Leslie West play guitar on Who's Next.
It's how Eddie Van Halen ended up on a Michael Jackson track, that legendary thing. You know, same thing.
But that doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
And that's the one downside of not having studios like we used to. You don't have those happy accidents.
Yes.
And that's why moving here, maybe the happy accident happens at a bar. Maybe it happens over lunch. Maybe, it happens at one of these things at Welcome to 79 Studios or at Blackbird where they have a party, or Westlake Pro, and you go bang into people there, meet people there. It's part of why I moved here. I want to have more happy accidents.
Yeah, that works. Gil Griffith, thank you for being my guest.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.